Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining ITSS Verona today. We are a Russia team, and we are me, Alexandra Tsarvulanova, Will Kingston-Cox, and Denise Gianotti. Welcome to this special interview, where we are very fortunate to be joined by Mr. Jozef Hrabina, a highly regarded expert on Eurasian politics and advisor and founder of GeopoLytics. It's a consultancy firm dedicated to navigating geopolitical dynamics in world. And today we're going to discuss some most pressing questions about Russia's strategic culture, its nuclear rhetoric, and the shifting dynamics of the post-Soviet space. Our expert will help us to understand how Russia's historical and ideological roots shape its current policies, including confrontation with West, and how the war with Ukraine influenced the whole European security architecture. We're also keen to discuss the regional shifts in the post-Soviet space and the potential for changing alliances in this volatile period. So, dear Dr. Hrabina, could you please give us a brief overview of the background of Russia's strategic culture that probably comes from the USSR period?
Yes, thank you, and hello. This is a real pleasure to be here today with you. So Russia's strategic culture, it's not only a strategic culture that has been developing over the past 3 or 4 decades since the Soviet Union started to collapse or was collapsing. Russia and its strategic culture, or I would call it threat perceptions, were developing with Russia's statecraft over the past millennia, right? You'd find many spillovers between historical Russia and contemporary Russia, be it fear of external enemy, fear of domestic unrest, fear of land invasion, right? You would see that Hitler-led land invasion to Russia, Napoleon-led land invasion to Russia. Not only that, medieval Kievan Rus and later Moscow Duchy they were defending themselves from land invasions by nomadic tribes. So these are the threat perceptions that have been forming for millennia, and they were transforming over time with the current geopolitical landscape around Russia. But the latest, so for instance, to bridge the medieval interests of Russia with the contemporary interests of Russia, you would see this fear of land invasion and especially from the West transformed into creating a zone of buffer state in Russia's neighborhood after the World War II, right? In terms of creating satellites, a network of satellite states in Central and Eastern Europe. Today, we have a similar issue with Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, or the Southern Caucasus states. Russia is still trying to create this zone of buffer states around itself in order to protect itself, which is, one would argue, which is a legitimate great power politics in terms of realism. So this is something we should take in consideration when we're talking about what is forming contemporary Russia's threat perceptions embedded in Russia's strategic culture. I would put on more contemporary politics. Now I'm sharing a screen, and I would like to maybe elaborate more on how Russia's threat perceptions have been, I would say, developing in more contemporary terms. Starting from the left, we see a very old notion of Russia, and that's a very old notion to Russia's threat perceptions or security security thinking. It's a fear for internal sovereignty or integrity. The minute Russia doesn't have a, or this is prevalent thinking in Russia. The minute or the moment Russia doesn't really have a strong ruler in the country, it succumbs to chaos. By that efficiently comes a period of, I would say, suffering for domestic population. We would see that after as a consequence of Bolshevik revolution, or as a consequence of collapse of the Soviet Union, when you would have these wild 90s, which weren't really wild for Russians. They were really a period of suffering. People would lose their jobs. The Russia's economy would literally spiral downward until the moment when you would have in 1999, when Russia was on the verge of bankruptcy. This is something that is accompanied with lack of coherent ruling in a country. We remember Boris Yeltsin rule. It was a very weak ruler. It was a very weak president, and he couldn't consolidate the country. This was also accompanied with separatist tendencies within Russia. We remember Chechen wars. There were 2 Chechen wars, and we would also have separatist tendencies in Tatarstan, which is a very rich province of Russia. This all escalated in civil war, or so-called civil war in Russia, when there was a shelling of Russia's parliament, Duma, in 1994. And all this is really attributed in Russia to a weak government. Therefore, there is a direct line between, or direct correlation, when the Russia's elite speaks to its citizens that, if this happens, there will be lawlessness in the country, and therefore they can drive a direct causality between lawlessness and their actual performance in the country, or their situation, their living situation, because many people do remember these times, right? Not only that, it's I would say, we as a Westerners, we do see our governments as a necessary evil, administrators of public goods. But we have right to overthrow our governments when these governments do not serve our greater good, right? That's the classic liberal theory of a government, Lockean theory of government. Russia's theory of government, it is a security provider. It is a vehicle that is there to prevent from 90s to happen, right? So we draw a direct line between a cause and an effect. Therefore, Russia is Leviathan, Hobbesian Leviathan. It is a security provider, nothing more. People, therefore, are willing to sacrifice their personal freedoms, which we see today in a war against Ukraine. They're willing to sacrifice their personal freedoms in exchange for their security. That's why so many people still follow Vladimir Putin, even despite clear signs of corruption, clear signs of weak performances on the battlefield, even though it's not true anymore, but still at the beginning of the war, and despite the fact that their country is clearly acting against the international norms and international law. Internal sovereignty is also very tightly connected to border security. Why? We would see from 2003 a wave of revolutions in a post-Soviet space. They call them so-called color revolutions. In Russia, these revolutions would be viewed as a series of events or a chain of events at the end of which is Russia and regime change in Russia. You would see that in statements of many officials in Russia. It is a prevalent theme that color revolutions are actually targeting Russia, destabilizing Russia, and are aiming to destabilize Russia. Now, at this point, you can not only draw a line between border security, but also internal sovereignty, sovereignty of Russia here. And that's why Russians viewed, for instance, Rose revolution in Georgia as a threatening to their interests. We would see they would view Maidan or Orange revolutions in Ukraine as threatening to their internal sovereignty and border security, and also any other revolution, such as the ones in Central Asia or Southern Caucasus, be it Armenia, for instance, were very intensively scrutinized. Another layer to this border security phenomena or threat perception would be definitely the one, this dynamic when during these revolutions where EU and especially NATO involved. This is directly viewed as a competitor alliance to Russia, and therefore it is viewed as a direct security threat to Russia. So these are two areas, or I would say three areas, because we see already a competitor, external competitor in form of NATO to Russia, Russia's threat perceptions. 2007 and until today. In 2007, there is a famous speech of Vladimir Putin at Munich Security Conference when he openly criticized West for eroding international law, especially the United States, and for applying double standards in international affairs. This is the point which we would talk about, which we could frame as a resurgent moment for Russia in great power politics. Russia in 90s understood already during Yugoslavian war. You would have Yevgeny Primakov, who was a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, a very famous person in Russia. And he's very famous because he was the first, after the collapse of Soviet Union, who started to say that we will never be allies with West. We really need to be equals with West because they will never take us as equals. This is the prevalent thinking in Russian political elite since Yugoslavian wars, when Russia really when Russia had to abandon its ally in form of Serbia. They had to abandon them despite many numerous pleas to help. And it is very important because for Russia, this was, so I would say, watershed moment that they need to become a great power in order to secure their own interests in world affairs. This is also very important because this is still Yeltsin time. Putin starts at 2000s. And Putin came to power as a pro-Western politician. He was genuinely convinced that Russia must integrate within transatlantic security architecture and political architecture. So NATO and the EU on both fronts. These integration efforts failed. So between 2000 and 2007, Russia, or Vladimir Putin and his ruling cluster, as they call it in Russia, they really sobered up or came to a realization that they will never be allies with the West. By that I mean, I think the most crucial moment in these relations was definitely Iraq war, decision to intervene in Iraq on the US side, and Russia. And at that point, Russia sided with France and Germany on the grounds of Security Council in order to oppose the US advocacy efforts to invade Iraq. This was a watershed moment for Americans, who understood that bringing Russia to NATO will mean more balancing opportunities for others, for other states to balance the U.S. interests within alliance, and which is completely understandable, because alliances are hierarchical structures, military alliances, and these hierarchical structures are based on military might, not on democratic vote. Right, so it's a top-down structure, and you don't want to invite countries that might eventually undermine your rule within your own military alliance, in which you're spending on defense more than all of your members combined, right? Even I would say even twice or two times or three times more, right? So this is how Russia started to think about its great power status, a renewal of its great power status, or resurrecting its great power status. And it is a threat perception for Russia, because if you would see some pollings from Russia, you would see that even common people would think that without Russia as a great power, Russia without having a great power status, Russia cannot survive in international affairs. So this is deeply rooted in Russian thinking, not only strategic thinking, it's deeply rooted in a whole populational thinking. And also, you would find a quote of Vladimir Putin, it's very recent, I think it's from this year or previous year, where he said, without Russia as a great power, there is no, in the world, there is no need for the world. So this is really deeply rooted strategic think. This is really deeply imprinted in Russia's strategic thinking. You would see so much positive sentiments towards the historical eras in such as post-Napoleonic wars. During Tsar Alexandra, Russia was really perceived as one of the as a savior of Europe. Russia's soldiers were marching in Paris, and the same goes for the current World War II memory, when Russia's soldiers, are viewed as heroes, saviors, liberators of Europe. So really, Russia and Russian strategic thinking and its people, they really tend to think about Russia as a great power, and they really positively targeting these memories, and really they're nurturing literally nurturing these memories of great power times when Russia was one of the leaders, global leaders, and this is how they associate the good times. They associated with good times for Russian population.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hrabina. Thank you very much for providing such detailed explanation of different periods, how Russian strategic culture was developing. And actually, our next question is exactly about the hierarchy in post-Soviet space.
Okay.
Thank you again for
yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry for cutting you.
Thank you again. In the context of constantly developing and changing strategic culture of both Russia and the West, it will be interesting to discuss regional hierarchy of post-Soviet space. And acting as the main successor of the USSR, Russia often used to serve as a mediator, we can say, in multiple territorial disputes and political conflicts like Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria. Can we say that by attacking Ukraine directly, Russia lost its status of regional hegemon and became just an ordinary geopolitical player? And if so, has this shift created a power vacuum that external powers like Turkey and China, for example, could fill?
This is a very interesting question. I think where Russia, firstly, on Russia as a negotiator of conflicts in a post-Soviet space, Russia, be it the USSR or Russian Empire in pre-20th century, always acted as a central power, as a stabilizer or pacifier of local conflicts. For instance, Nagorno-Karabakh war or conflict drags until the beginning of 20th century, when during the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia's imperial forces retreated from the Southern Caucasus, and Azeri-Armenian conflict started to really come to light. But when Soviet Union bounced back and consolidated its internal power, it actually could intervene and pacify both warring sides. Interestingly enough, during Soviet times or during Soviet Union, Armenian and Azerbaijani marriages were very common. They were living side by side. So Russia, as a central power, was acting as a pacifier in the region. The same goes for Transnistria or Central Asian conflicts, right? These are classic post-colonial conflicts for demarcation lines. They were actually something like administrational lines, but nobody really cared whose territory is it, because it was Soviet territory. It wasn't Armenian or Azerbaijani, or it wasn't Transnistrian and Moldovan. It wasn't Kyrgyz or Tajik. These things were there just from the purely administrational reasons, and that's why Russia acted as a pacifier in these, because there was central power above these potentially warring sides. The minute this disappeared, these people started to think about it in terms of war and in terms of conflict and gains and power, and this started all over again after the collapse of Soviet Union. Back to the point of whether Russia has lost its influence on these territories. In some territories, yes. Be it Nagorno-Karabakh or Transnistria, it will be very hard for Russia to act there as some sort of peacekeeping force. But for instance, in Georgia, it's gaining a lot of influence now, right? Which is a country of 20% of which is occupied by Russia today, after Russo-Georgian War from 2008. So it is very interesting. Somewhere Russia gained and somewhere Russia has lost its influence. I think it's about proximity from Russian borders to that territory. The more detached that territory will be, the less influence Russia will have there. For instance, in Moldova, let's see how the presidential elections and EU referendum is going to turn out. But this is, in my opinion, the reason behind that. I wouldn't, and for instance, in Central Asia, Russia is actually increasing its influence, which is very interesting. In Southern Caucasus, there is Turkey, of course. Turkish-Azeri alliance, I think, is the most dominant force currently in the Southern Caucasus. But that's more of a global dynamics, that you have multipolar world today. There's more actors with closer, with better position to actually engage with these regions, whereas Moscow is really geopolitically far from, for instance, Armenia, whereas Turkey and Azerbaijan are basically encircling Armenia. I don't know whether that makes sense. Please ask for clarifications if I'm jumping from one topic to another. I really apologize. I'm trying to just squeeze in everything in short time.
No, that made perfect sense. Thank you very much. And just kind of focusing on these kind of the post-Soviet frozen states or unrecognized states, how we want to call them, and maybe in particular Transnistria, given Sunday's vote. Do you think the Russian war with Ukraine can have any effect on the dynamics within these territorial entities, and whether these conflicts are likely to become, or frozen conflicts, are likely to become more internationalized as a result of the Ukraine war, maybe involving new actors beyond Russia and the European Union, the United States, the traditional actors that we've seen, particularly with Transnistria, given that we see new emerging actors in the scene, whether these conflicts will become internationalized or not?
Yeah, definitely they're becoming internationalized whenever great power dynamics enters this this calculus, right? So you have in case of Moldova, this conflict would become internationalized because there's already interest of the European Union, potentially NATO. It's not very popular question whether Moldova should join NATO within Moldovans. That's why they're voting only on the EU this Sunday. But whenever there is another external actor involved, it would become internationalized. If it's Kazakhstan, for instance, I think it would be mostly interstate conflict. It wouldn't have that big of a structural impact on or maybe Tajikistan or Uzbekistan or depending. But that's like very purely hypothetical, hypothetical scenario. On what was the second part of? I'm sorry.
Kind of looking at other actors coming in to these frozen conflicts.
Yeah. This is what I answered. And the first part was about Moldova.
Yes. So maybe if you could, for our audience, elaborate more on maybe potential risks that come with Sunday's vote. So, for example, if Moldova were to vote no for EU membership, could we see perhaps Russia taking a more antagonistic approach in Transnistria, and also, if you feel comfortable talking on it, the autonomous region of Gagauzia as well, which we've seen Russia taking more of an interest in over the last year or so?
Gagauzia was always very pro-Russian. These regions are, these regions are very pro-Russian because they have positive sentiments from 19th century when Russia was liberating these territories from Ottoman Empire, and then Russia was long-standing central power and the key player in the region. And that state with the Transnistrians and Gagauz minority as well, and potential no on the EU. I don't. I mean, it's gonna be tight. I think Moldova will decide to join EU. We know from the empirical evidence that Russia has no issues with countries joining EU. It's mostly about NATO. So this tells you that it's mostly of security considerations. These worries are mostly of security considerations, and that Russia sees zero-sum game mostly with military actors, not with other political actors, which is interesting because Russia actually lacked, or at least lacked. I don't know how about now. We will see. We will have to wait for several years now, but it lacked tools of soft power and political attraction, because how Russian world worked was actually that they were corrupting a very close group of stakeholders, politicians, oligarchs, and people that were close to Russia in order to stay aligned with Russia's interests, right, in these countries, be it Transnistria, be it Ukraine, Belarus, you name it, all post-Soviet countries. This is the system of Russian. This is a political, economic, and social system of Russian world. But this system was benefiting only tiny sliver of population, while the rest of the population was more or less poor. So that's why you had these popular uprisings in a post-Soviet in post-Soviet countries, because these people would be poor while they would be watching super rich oligarchs offshoring their revenues from their giant corporations that were actually based in post-Soviet space. You know, we could talk about Azovstal, right? The factory in Mariupol. We would talk about the coal processing plant in Avdiivka. These are known to us because we know that these are the places where the fiercest battles of Russo-Ukrainian wars were fought. So these factories would carry entire economy of small to middle size of European country, right? And in Ukraine, you would have plenty of these, and GDP, one of the smallest GDPs per capita in entire Europe, right? It was one of the poorest countries. So what was happening to those money, right? What was happening to this economic performance? Where did it all go? So eventually this would lead to internal tensions, social tensions, and that would lead to revolutions, such as the ones we saw in post-Soviet space, and Russia didn't have an answer to that, because on the other hand, they were standing against transparent, open market system that was democratic. People had freedom of speech, so they could freely speak against some unlawful practices. Human rights were, to a certain extent, there are human rights and all this stuff, that comes with the liberal political order. And they couldn't really compete with that. That's why they were losing their ground in a post-Soviet space.
Well, thank you very much for that detailed answer. Now, to kind of shift it more into a broader kind of external question, just to finish off. We talked about earlier about kind of strategic biases. How do you think strategic biases influence Western policymakers' responses to Russia's nuclear threats, particularly in the context of Putin's nuclear rhetoric and Russia's evolving nuclear doctrine, and whether there's any specific aspects of Russia's strategic culture that the West might be misinterpreting, potentially leading to flawed assessments or responses that are unintentionally escalatory?
Yes. Well, the worst misperception Russia and West they have about each other is that they both think that their counterpart is in deep decline and therefore lacks capabilities to counter their actions. This was something. This was the prevalent logic behind a catastrophic unpreparedness of Russia's army before the invasion of Ukraine, and this is a reason why European leaders thought that we will just send some old Soviet equipment to Ukraine and throw some sanctions on Russia, and we'll finish Russian authoritarian, monotonous, and archaic system. We will just, we will cause its collapse. None of this has happened. And it shows us how misperceptions are shaping grand strategies of major actors and how they're leading to major blunders that are having catastrophic consequences for Russia and today for the West, because after failed Ukrainian offensive from 2023, West has zero strategy on Ukraine. I would even say it's a panic there's chaos and panic within the Western political ranks right now, and it shows on reluctance to provide more aid and reluctance to commit more politically on the Ukrainian side, and that also reflects on the battlefield dynamics. So this is A. B. the problem with the West is that, you know, we see really Russia. We're thinking really short term. So we're thinking, okay, so Russia did nothing about more and more weapon supplies to Ukraine, so they're likely bluffing about nuclear weapons. But today we know that William J. Burns, director of CIA, confirmed that in 2022, Russia was very close to using tactical nukes during Ukrainian counteroffensive. I was actually saying that. I was actually saying the same, because we didn't do our homework right. We didn't analyze Russia's interests in Ukraine, how important the war in Ukraine is for Russian political elite, and what are the actual Russia's capabilities, because we thought that they really failed at the beginning, so they will be failing all over again and again on the battlefield. Instead of using this momentum for our benefit, we thought that it's gone, it's over. We won the war. We started to talk about post-war recovery of Ukraine. We were organizing conferences, and we thought that this is okay. This is how it should be. And today, I would say, 1.5 years away from the first post-war recovery conference in Switzerland, there's no end of war in sight. There's no will on the Russian side to talk about peace. And this is all caused by grand strategic biases based on misperceptions of Russia. I would not say Russia is not going to use nuclear weapons when its survival is at stake. And we need to understand, what does it mean? Putting Russia's survival at stake means putting Russia's elite survival at stake, because they equal their survival with survival of Russia's state. The fact that they kidnapped it can be just said amongst us, but still, they're the ones who are going to decide. They're the ones who decided on invading Ukraine. They're the ones that are going to decide on use of nuclear weapons. So whenever they feel like they're losing the war, it means that they will lose their power at home, because if they lose this war, they will lose the power at home, and therefore the Russian state won't survive, and therefore they can use tactical nukes or whatever nukes they would use. But I in my personal opinion, it's more about tactical nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much. Doesn't sound really optimistic, but it only means that we should pay more attention to such complex issues and discuss it more and do more analysis. And of course, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today and giving us very in-depth explanation about the role of strategic biases in global security architecture and providing these analysis about different periods of Russia's strategic culture formulation. And I think this interview was amazing because we discussed multiple very important issues. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope our audience loved this interview as well, and they got very clear understanding of such complex issues as power hierarchy in post-Soviet region and how it is changing now in the outbreak of Russian-Ukrainian war. So thank you very much. And we look forward to continue with similar interviews. So see you soon.
Thank you for having me.